Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Building with Scope and Public. And today we have a really interesting one. So most of you have seen Scope and are already accustomed to our existing user interface, something that we now call a performance mode. But we have just recently introduced something that we believed answers and helps users have a better understanding of, how to get started with Scope, how to mentally better represent what comes in, what gets processed, and what gets out, and that is our workflow builder. Keep in mind that all of the things that I'll be showing you today are equally doable in workflow builder and in this classical UI, but in workflow builder they are way more obvious, I would say even more intuitive. So let me quickly switch to our workflow builder. I will delete the current nodes that I have here and I will start from scratch. And what better way to start from scratch other than clicking on this big plus sign. It's a big plus for our users. So I'll click add first step, and from the drop down menu now you can see that we have a bunch of different options that we can select. I will not go through all of them. We will be preparing a special longer video that goes into more details about composability of these things, development of them, but I will show you a relatively simple example today just to familiarize yourselves with our workflow builder. So first things first, I'll start with source, and I will not complicate this too much. I will just basically use the existing file as a source. And as you can see here, for example, I can select camera, spout, depending on the input options that I have on my machine. Now notice that all these nodes, they will have these little edges that I'll be able to connect to other nodes while I'm building my workflow. So what I want to do here, basically, I want to take this input video currently being fed from file, process it through our LongLive pipeline, add a couple more frames into it because the default model will maybe limit this to 12, 13, 14 frames per second, and I want to use Rife to increase that, and then I might even pipe that through a community build node with the visual effects, and then I will show you, for example, how you can use helper nodes or those utility nodes to help you better manage some of those properties and values. So first things first, I have my source added here. So the next step is I'm going to be adding a pipeline. So I'll just right click and select a pipeline. And from this select pipeline, I will find LongLive or LongLive. Again, after all this time, I'm still not 100% sure how it's called. So what I'm going to do now, I can easily connect this source to an input point here in our pipeline. So if I were to hit run now, nothing would really happen because we need one more thing, and that thing is output, basically a sink where I can see how these things work. But while I'm still here, you can see that there is a bunch of different options for me. Here I can reset cache, I can change the height, width, speed, seed, and a bunch of other options, including the prompt. But let me do something super simple. As I said, the first step here, I'm just going to right click again, hit sync. This is going to be my output. And as you can see here, I have input feeding into video, and then from output, I will feed that into sync. Now, if I were to hit run, this would get processed and I would get my panda instead of this cat here. So let's hit run, give it a minute. I'll speed this part of the video and see what I end up with. All right, so I have my output here in this sync. I can expand this to go into full screen, or I can just grab an border of this and extend it a little bit. But what you can see here, I'm getting around 13 FPSs. Not great, not terrible. We can definitely do a little bit better. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to add another pipeline, which is called Rife. R-I-F-E, which will interpolate frames and essentially effectively give me a higher FPSs. So how I'm going to do that, I will stop my current workflow from running. I will disconnect this thing. I'll move sync a little bit to the side because I'll need it later. Then I'll right click again. I will choose pipeline because Rife is one of the pipelines, and under the select pipeline, I will just try to find Rife, which is here. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Again, notice that, this is an input, this is an output connectors, and, obviously this is hinting, these dots are hinting to me what I can connect with which of these things. It might take you a while to figure out, how all these things work and, which fits with what. And, our UI tries to do the best job possible around that. so you can't really connect something that wouldn't produce a decent enough result. But it might be a little bit of a trial and error here. So let's connect these things. So again, input here, output here. So I will just output from this LongLive model is now going to become an input for Rife, and output, which again is a video, is now going to be connected to my sync here. So if I just use my scroll button on my mouse, so I can see the entire workflow in one screen. So if I hit run again, I should get pretty much the same result, but with higher FPSs. Remember the previous case, I was getting around 12.5, 13 FPSs. With Rife, I should be getting more. How much more? I don't know. Let's hit run and see. Okay, now my video is running again, pretty much exactly the same stuff as before, but there we go. I'm getting 22 to 23 FPSs, which is significantly more than 12 or 13 that I had previously. So if I were now to expand this a little bit more, you can see that the overall movement, the trees in the background, this panda stuff as well, looks way more smoother. Now let's imagine that I want to apply some visual effects on this. Let's say chromatic aberration or something like that, just to give it a little bit of a different vibe to my output. So how can I do that? There are a couple of options here, of course, but I could use, for example, some of the nodes that have been built by our community members. So again, I'm going to stop this workflow from running. I will now do the following. So I will add this effect on top of the stuff that Rife has produced, right? So once the Rife processes the incoming video, I want to feed that through a VFX plugin and then show that and move that to a sync. So by clicking on this middle dot here for these connectors, you will be disconnecting them, right? So I'm going to do exactly that here. And I will now go to nodes. This is a bunch of nodes that have been built by Daydream community members, but also members of our staff. So I'll just look for VFX. Let's go with Scope VFX and install it. So by clicking this, it will install this node and made it available for me in a moment. So let's wait until it restarts the server for me. Might take a couple of seconds there, depending on the node. Server restarted. Okay. If everything went well, which I believe it has, I will now have the ability to pipe this through this Scope VFX thing. So I will going to close this dialog. Again, right click, go to pipeline. And now under the pipelines, I will try and look for this VFX thing. Yeah, I have it. It's called VFX pack. Now, a couple of things to keep in mind here. Let me decrease the size of this so I just have a little bit more space. A couple of things to keep in mind here, right? So again, you can see here that it takes video as an input, audio output, video as an output, and I have a couple of effects here that I can play with. So there's a chromatic aberration that's been enabled, VHS, retro CRT, halftone, and whatnot. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do it, very simply. I will just take the output from Rife. It's going to become input for this pack. And I'm going to use just the chromatic aberration with this, intensity of 0.3, which is fine. And now, as you can already guess, my next step is going to be taking the output of this VFX and moving it into a sync so I can just see how it all works. What it should happen is, I should be getting relatively high FPSs thanks to Rife, and then having these visual effects applied on top of those things and presented to me in this sync. So let's hit run and give it a minute. Okay, we're cooking. Now I can see chromatic aberration applied here. If I zoom in a little bit, you will see it even better. What I can do, I can, for example, change the intensity of this thing. So let me move that to, I don't know, something that 1. So you can see that, blue, green, and red, they all have been displaced a little bit. So you can see how it exactly looks right now. But let's take this step forward. So I will make the intensity to be around, I don't know, 0.65, something like that. And now imagine a situation where, for example, you might be running a live show and you want to have a fine-grained control over these values here, like the intensity or angle or whatever that you want to do, and maybe even map that to your MIDI instrument, MIDI keyboards or whatever. So you have this tactile control over this instead of, clicking on these sliders here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use another node. So I will stop my pipeline here again. I will disconnect these things. Well, I didn't really need to do that, but never mind. I'll disconnect it for now. I'll do right click. And now you will see here that we have an entire family of controls, UI elements, utilities. We will be covering those in the subsequent videos, but for now I'm just going to go to UI and I will select a slider. So now you will also notice one other thing. Let me make a little bit more space for these things here. So when I'm connecting nodes, they're connected with these thicker white lines. And when I'm connecting these properties or different elements, they're connected with these colorful connectors. So what I'm going to do here, I will grab this slider and make sure that its intensity, basically that the value of this slider maps to intensity here. So instead of, clicking on this smaller thing here and, trying to find my way around, I'm just going to grab this value here and connect it to intensity. You can see that they have now been pretty much locked. So when I'm moving value here, that value is also reflected here. And again, I'll go back from my output, connect it to the sync and hit run. And then we will play with the slider and see how it affects the final output. So let's give it a second to initialize and run. We are now already building a bunch of things here, so it might take a second. You can also, while it's loading, you can see that, I can set up even a step value here, depending on, how fine degree of control I want to have here. Something that, even this node has not exposed to me as a user by its creator by default. But that's why we have a bunch of these things externally that can help me with that. So again, decent number of FPSs thanks to Rife, and now I can play with this, and you will see that I've cranked it up to 0.96, so you can clearly see the chromatic aberration effect very much alive. And if I remove this or crank it down a little bit, you will see it in real time being presented differently. So this, as I said, allows you for a higher degree of control. You can map these outputs or these slider values to your external hardware controls instead of just clicking around here. This just gives you a higher degree of control over different values. Again, a bunch of different options available for you. So if you right click on it, you will see sources, pipeline, syncs, inputs, outputs, recording. Recording is fun. So I could add, for example, a record button, and then I will just make sure that this output gets recorded. So that's something that we can easily do, right? So that means that this output stream is going to be recorded to my local machine if I need to do that, if I want to use that video for whatever else. So this has been a pretty simple workflow that I built just to show you some basic concepts. You can explore way more complex workflows by clicking on this workflow tab. We have awesome starting packages for you, including the LTX, which is something that community is very excited about, and you can also find a bunch of community workflows yourselves. If you want to share your workflow, you can easily go to the menu. You can import the existing workflows or export your workflow. So you can just export it and save it locally, or export it directly to daydream.live, where it's available. There is going to be available for other community members and everyone else. So I hope this was useful. As I said, it was a quite simple video, something that just shows you basic concepts of sources, pipelines, processors, some control manipulation, syncs and displays, and recording. As I said, in the future videos, we'll go way beyond that with LoRa's, with multiple models, with multiple inputs. So stay tuned, learn with Scope, and I'll see you in the next one.